Hello. Welcome to Transcendent Philosophy, Christopher. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Man, it's nice to be here
I
finally.
know we've been planning on discussing a lot of issues, mostly regarding consciousness and suffering. You've got a really interesting backstory that I really want to dig into and pick your mind because you've had a lot of interesting experiences that I think a lot of people can learn from.
Hopefully, I mean it's 12:45 in the morning. We'll see what I can remember.
Yeah, well, don't worry about it. I will keep bothering you until I get extract all the details from your mind.
Okay.
So yeah, just to start off, let's just kind of discuss backgrounds and maybe how we kind of met each other. So on my end, I started a philosophy channel called Transcendent Philosophy, and I'm an ex-Mormon, and I went through kind of the meaning crisis thing where it's like, oh no, I don't have religion anymore. Now what? And so I started like getting really interested in philosophy, trying to build up some new perspectives. And then I met some other ex-Mormons like Chris Hanna, kind of got connected to him, and then I met you through him. It seems like we're all kind of in that similar phase. Is that accurate?
Honestly, yeah, and a lot of us go sit on the porch with Hannah and friends for a while, and then we all become friends and start doing our own thing, and that's just how it's been going.
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of a fascinating phase of life because it's like once you lose religion, it's kind of like the world is open to you. Everyone kind of has a different path, and it's kind of an exploration
Yeah,
of
it is.
right.
A lot of different divergences, a lot of interesting people that you talk to on different paths for sure.
Yeah. So yeah, tell me about your kind of background and what you've been doing in that way.
I mean, yeah, went through a lot of the same things. So you in our little pre-chat, you already just had my brain soaring. I'm not even sure where does my story start, man? Because like, who are we? Does it start 5 years ago when I left the church? Does it start like 84 years ago with my great great grandma when she was doing stuff that I relate to? Like, who knows?
Mm,
When does my story
the
start? Where should we start?
the
So I left like 5 years ago.
well,
Meaning crisis stuff. Yeah, what
I
do
was
you
just
got?
gonna joke with you. It started at the Big Bang. It's been unfolding ever since the Big Bang.
Oh, so you're a big
It-
bangist. I see. I'm just kidding.
yeah.
We'll get there.
Uh,
Um, uh, and I feel like I went through a lot of the normal things that people go through when they leave the church, like you said, and had all the phases, meaning crisis. What do you do? And for me, it was my big struggle was the losing your eternal family thing and the existential crisis of like, yeah, who am I, kind of thing. Um, and I mean, then I took some drugs and now I'm here. I guess that's a short story.
all right. Well, I am really interested in getting getting going deep on some of your issues with health and suffering and how you kind of transcended that. That from my channel is called Transcendent Philosophy, and the way I think of transcendence, it's going above and beyond normal limitations, right? And
Mm-hmm.
suffering is usually something that just kind of collapses your soul. It's one of those things that just breaks you. And if you can
Yeah.
learn how to live a good life despite the suffering, if you can learn to embrace the challenge of life despite that, to me that's transcending the suffering. I think that's like impressive, it's heroic, and I want to hear about how you did that.
I mean, that's a more healthy outlook than I
Oh.
have, I guess. No, I mean, no, I've got a lot of like, I just like what I'm saying is I like that language because when you first said that, I was like, I'm just in pain all the time. You can't transcend it.
Oh.
But then you say it like that, and I'm like, okay, fine. I guess I do. You're right. I should be kinder to myself.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, there's a battle in and of itself right there, just with the linguistic. You can go that far with suffering, like many people do. So where do we start here? Because you're not the only one with interesting stories about transcending your suffering, and we relate very well in the type of suffering we have, not just the existential and emotional from the church and meaning crisis things, but from our chronic pains. So
Exactly.
where's our stepping stone here?
Yeah, well, just do my story real quick is I think I have scoliosis. I think I started noticing like a warping of my spine in my teens. The pain onset around 22 years old, and the pain has just got
Mm.
worse and worse every year. And now I'm at a point where I like have to lean back in order to talk on a podcast because I need to like get at an angle for my spine to not be in pain. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so,
And we had to meet at a certain hour
oh,
because we both have weird sleep schedules.
yeah, I've got multiple problems, but yeah,
Yeah.
who knows if the spine influences my sleep problems or what? That's kind of confusing.
I mean, yeah, they do. So for the longest time, I would say that I had insomnia, just classic. Like I read the DSM-5, and I have insomnia. But it's like the patterns have shifted over the years, and it's been kind of weird. It's pretty much always been textbook, but with its variances. But I came to find that with long-standing chronic pain, a lot of people have just say sleep disturbances. I guess mine were pretty extreme, but it's pain insomnia, not insomnia.
That's a
Yeah,
that's a good way to put
it's
it.
the inability to sleep due to
Yeah,
pain.
yeah.
And whether or not it's like your mind's having trouble with like you roll over and it hurts, or you're putting too much pressure because you're in one position too long, you might not recognize it, but like your body doesn't want to sleep for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I during the worst phases of my experience with health, my painsomnia got so bad that I was literally in like a rage at the structure of reality. Like I'm laying in bed, desperate for sleep, totally exhausted from a day of work. My back is inflamed. I'm trying to sleep, and my spine is just like torturing me. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
I can't get any rest because I'm being tortured for like 4 or 5 hours, like all night long. And I'm just like furious. Like, why is reality torturing me?
That's a psychedelic experience, man. It really is. Just a few hours of torture in the middle of the night. You don't know why, you can't get it, but it's just, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the unfortunate thing is yeah, we don't come down from those things all the time. They're not as, they're not in the peak of their extreme, but the pains are always there. And that the next night it could just happen again.
Oh,
The psychedelic, you got to wait a couple of days or a couple of weeks.
yeah.
It's a constant thing. But yeah, I've been screaming into the void in the middle of the night just because I like roll over and nothing works either for hours on end. Yeah,
So frustrating when it's bad.
yeah. And for me, mine was pretty similar. 13 years old, kind of tragic response that my body had to an event, and literally just a couple months later, like doctors thought it was some growing pains. I'm playing sports, getting hurt, whatever, and then I stopped growing, and pain never went away, and all that. And so yeah, from like 8th and 9th grade on since then, yeah, lots of fun.
And just like daily pain off and on, or
No, yeah, it's just always, which I know sounds insane to some people, but it like something hurts all the time, and sometimes it's all of me, and sometimes I look like I'm just having a normal time. Like I said to you before this, I'm in a lot of pain right now, but I've been doing it for 22 years, so
I have a question.
I look real happy, guys. But
I have a question.
yeah.
Why are you smiling?
because I'm talking to you, and I'm used to not sleeping anyway. So I'm transcending the suffering
It,
on your
it's so
behalf.
beautiful. And I want to know how you do it because I think there's a lot of people that suffer and they haven't figured out how to transcend it yet. And I think it's so important to your quality of life to like figure that step, to figure that out.
It is, yeah, and it's not easy, and some of it might be language, because my brain again in there is with the transcending, but here I am on that kind of philosophy channel, so we might have kind of a dual conversation with it here and there, because the way some people can't get past it is because they don't have the words to talk about it. They do need other people. There are going to be some people who are going to be like, yeah, I need to transcend it that way, Seth's way. And then other people are going to be like, nah, I need to transcend it Christopher's way, which is that it doesn't exist, that transcending it part, really. So this could be interesting. We agree on so much of the approach, but that final conclusion
Wow, this
has
sounds fascinating. All right. You need to expound on that. Is this an ontological issue?
uh
Is that what you're alluding to?
well, and I'm not just saying this to be one of those kind of people, but because chronic pain just deletes my lexicon. What's ontology to you?
Okay. So ontology is like the study of what exists. And so you
Mm-hmm.
could like different ontologies could be like different theories about what exists. And so
Like just the nature of being, basically. Like what?
well so like anything that exists, it it is within being. Like
Yeah,
to
yeah.
be
Okay.
is to exist.
Mm-hmm.
I am, therefore I exist. You know what I mean? And so like I would have a bias to say suffering exists, and therefore my ontology, my theory of what exists includes suffering. But it sounds like you're hinting to a different ontology where suffering doesn't exist.
No, it's a Wittgenstein Derrida thing. It's that the language equal or mean the limits of your world, um, and as well as, I mean, the Derrida thing. Derrida's just French Zen, basically. If you read the language right, which basically teaches you that you're just muddling out of your mouth and out of your brain space a bunch of signs that signify significations of nothing, and that's just three of the same words that sound all fancy together in an alliteration, just like you're saying you're transcending your suffering when you're not doing it. You're just talking about it. To transcend it, you have to experience it. You have to scream in the middle of the night because you can't sleep, and you have to wake up the next morning when you got 30 minutes finally, or you have to hear the birds chirp at 4 a.m. Sorry, I won't swear on your podcast, but those red-bellied robins, 4 a.m., there they are to let you know you didn't get any sleep, you know?
Yep. So
So it's not an ontological thing. No, I guess.
so you think that suffering exists?
Yes, I'll just say yes for our Western conversation. Yes.
Oh, we might have. Okay. So explain your way of learning how to live life with a smile despite having to scream into the void sometimes.
Could you rephrase the question? You know, it's hard sometimes, especially after you've been doing it so long. And because, I mean, when I left the church, I did a lot of meditation, and words concepts just drop away, and so a lot of the times
Okay. I have a different.
Yeah.
I think Camus was the one who said this, that the
Mm-hmm.
number one philosophic question is
Whether or not you should kill yourself.
exactly whether, and so suffering seems very suffering, especially intense suffering, is a very potent reason to kill yourself. You know what I mean? And so when you can embrace
Mm-hmm.
life despite intense suffering, you're transcending the the desire to end it all. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So yeah, I remember having that Camus line stuck in my brain a lot in 2021. And I was reading a lot of Alan Watts around then too, I remember. And I agreed a lot with Camus, and I was past my suicidal ideations at that point. Um, but I remember feeling like, no, he's kind of right. Um, and not everyone's gonna, really go through that intense pull of it, whether attempting or emotionally tugging. But everyone's gonna have those thoughts, I think. Nearly everyone. And yes, sir. No, I'm just thinking of the Camus line. Whether or not my brain goes so many places. I guess the number one question, and we can probably ride the rest of the conversation off of this, and maybe this is more what I'm getting at with how we agree so much, but in the end, the conclusions kind of fly different directions, is just asking yourself who is suffering and who needs to transcend it. Because when you leave the church, there's a lot of different things that can happen to your identity depending on what kind of Mormon you were. And for me, there was a complete disjunction of, and some of it's connected to how you process Christ and God, or God and Christ first. There's a lot of different little paths, and sorry, so many paths, so many ways to go. Um, kind of can you this is something my brain does too, can you remind me maybe the direction I was going, because I forked on like three
That's
trains.
fine. That's fine. Um, so yeah, like finding the reason to embrace life, to resist the so like the whole nihilistic antinatalism, the suicide
Mm-hmm.
ideation. That there's
Mm-hmm.
kind of this negative path your mind can go when you're suffering. And it seems
Yeah.
like you didn't go that route, and I'm trying to figure out how you were able to not go that direction.
Well, I very much went that route, and the way I just got lost is because I see I've seen all the different routes that people's identities can take. And so I was just thinking of all the different scenarios, and forgetting I should just focus on mine. And mine was, I was the kind of ex Mormon where I realized that me, Christopher, I was only built off of the relationships I had had from a very young age. And if God's not there, Christ didn't suffer for me, for and in behalf of me. I gotta say the whole thing. Um, then, and none of that, like, pre-existent structures, there, afterlife, like all those questions all in one, come to the head of, okay, well then who is Christopher? Um, because I wasn't, there was in a point, we'll get to the point where this is when I was very nihilistic, very, there's no afterlife, atheist. Like, you just leave the church, especially Mormonism. You're Mormon, and if you leave, you're either some sort of other weird Christian or you're an atheist. Like those are your two immediate options. You're either you love Christ still and you go to another church, or you're like, screw it all, none of it's real. And then down the line you come to your senses. And down the line I came to my senses that atheism's a little extreme. I'm a non-theist, and part of that was part of my journey. But that was all baked into, they've been telling me my whole life, me, Christopher, I was me, Christopher, before, and then I came out and they all knew that they gave me the name Christopher, but they seemed to know who I was before, and they taught me all that. But if none of that's true, who the is Christopher? That's just a sound people like, transcending suffering. That's just a sound people are shooting out of their mouth holes. Christopher, okay, doesn't mean anything. That was the shattering of my identity. And that's what I was trying to get at earlier. It's there's so many different ways to shatter your identity, and that was the way mine shattered.
Was that connected to your experience with psychedelics and like an ego death experience, or was that independent?
No, this is all just me crashing from Mormonism, pre-psychedelics still.
Really? So you had an identity crisis with figuring out who you were.
Yeah, so there were a bunch of life things that aren't really relevant, that kind of like, I was already 2017 questioning some church things and things I didn't agree with, and then in 2018 I had life experiences, and I was like, yeah, these align with the what I was questioning. This seems to be more accurate to reality, we'll just say, in heavy quotes for those just watching, or for just listening. And yeah, no, so that was all pre-psychedelic, and I had only had some cannabis for my pain at that point. So this was all very sober me disappearing and not knowing where I was going. And psychedelics became the answer in a way, not immediately. But over time, yeah.
So I'm trying to figure out what's the relationship between your loss of identity or your mutation of identity and your ability to endure suffering. And is it like you disconnect from one and it helps you disconnect from the other, or is it something else?
In the no, that's probably the poor approach. In the end, it's just, I think of a specific word, but that's for later. They're just blending it together. You can't detach it really. And we're kind of leading up to how it is that now I am able to deal with those things and smile while we're here. And I'm getting shooting pains in my back and rib cage.
Jeez.
Yeah. It is what it is. It's a little spasm right now too. It's a little comfortable, but so identity crisis, akin to what we'd say ego loss. That when we get into that kind of stuff, I'm just going to tell you, you're not losing any ego that you think you have. But that's what I was going through back then. And yeah, I mean, on top of losing the church, losing your identity, and then still being in pain all the time and nothing you've ever done works. I was like Camus. I was like, I've thought of all the questions my whole life Mormonism taught me, and now I've got them all again that I'm answering. And it really seems that in the end, it's either there's an afterlife or there's not. And I've just got to decide which one I'm fine with. And then I've got to decide if I want to be alive or if I want to be dead. It really, in the end, he was right, comes down to that in a big, weird way for a lot of people. And I just didn't want to be around anymore. But at the point where I needed to transcend the suffering, I'll say, man, I was drowning in it for sure. But there's how do you word it? And I was still nihilistic and atheistic at the time, but even still, you struggle with, some people do. Talk to some people who it wasn't a problem, but then they still got through what they needed to. But for me and many people, you still struggle with, uh, well, there's still people here that rely on me, and I can't do that to them. Yeah, that one of my best friends, she and I talk about this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And we joke that if those people weren't around, like, in our lives, and it's funny because, like, I had said this to myself all the time, and then I said it to her once, or she said to me, I don't remember, and we're just someone else who feels it. And it's just like, if there were these other people in our lives that didn't rely on us, or that wouldn't be so affected, because they will. That's not like a selfish thing. It's like, you're going to affect people whether you know it or not. I'd probably just walk out into the woods and just live there until I die. Natural causes, bear, whatever.
That's pretty brave to be willing to face a bear.
Yeah, but if no one's relying on me, and Camus right, then why not try and fight a bear in the end if I'm gonna kill myself?
So it seems like your angle is kind of coalescing with my angle. So tell me if we're on the same page, or if we're doing something different here. When I think you watched my YouTube video on my story of transcending my suffering, and kind of the summation of that was, it was kind of a utilitarian-esque approach, which is, okay, my suffering is up here and my pleasure is down here, and it's like, I'm doing the math and it isn't worth it. I want to die. I was logically suicidal. And I find it, I've never heard of anyone say they're logically suicidal. I was not really emotionally. I always, like, growing up, I always thought suicidal was like an emotional thing. And I got to a point in my life where I'm not emotionally suicidal, I'm logically suicidal. Like, this sucks. I don't want this.
That's really funny. Like, you just got it out, like, pros and cons on a spreadsheet. Like,
I've done the calculations. It's not working in my favor. You know what I mean?
Oh, that's really funny. But I get that to a degree too, because I do think, and part of that is baked into some things I've gone through, in weird, deep ways, because it's like, one of the questions that I struggled with was like, okay, well, how much suffering do I bring into the world, knowing that my family's genetics culminated to me being this human who's in pain 24 hours a day, on top of my family's multiple sclerosis and osteo problems and lifelong depression. Like, okay, yeah, do I want to keep bringing little tiny bits of happy suffering into the world? I don't know. Because are they gonna struggle with emotionally wanting to kill themselves, or logically making spreadsheets being like, you know what, life doesn't add up to me wanting to live anymore, so I'm gonna go. But there's more calculations in that too, that you make, whether logic or emotional. But I think a little more logical, because I've thought too, is like, my loved ones, and you probably hear the same, is like, sometimes I feel like I'm such a burden in so many ways. I mean, they say that I'm not, but logically, I calculate things, finances, time, the years that are going to pass, and the way life changes, and I'm just going to keep being a burden logically, so
yeah. Totally.
Those are other things to transcend. Yeah, so you relate to that too.
Oh, absolutely. It's such a sad reality. But yeah, there's so to get back to where I was going, I feel like a lot of people, I don't know if straw man's the right word, but there's kind of a simplistic approach to utilitarianism. And then there's like this more macro, bird's eye view, more in-depth utilitarianism. And it seems like you're going down this more nuanced approach, which is, it's not just about my suffering and my pleasure. I'm including the people around me, and I'm including the future. You're doing this bigger calculation. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I the way I'm thinking about it is that in the brain, love is a type of meaning. Love is a type of pleasure that can offset suffering. And so when you have loved ones, you're like, oh, if I'm gone, I'm going to impact my loved ones. If I'm here, I can help my loved ones. So it seems like it's like my suffering is here, my pleasure is here, but my love for other people brings the calculation up to here. It's like if I
Hmm.
stick around, it's like the love is what's offsetting the suffering.
Yeah. Yeah. That is part of it for sure. I mean, yeah, I mean, it's just kind of as simple as that. You're right on.
Right. Hmm. Well, so you feel that that kind of incorporating that love was what helped you transcend your suffering?
Yes, I mean, so my path about it was, I mean, that's just definitely baked in. Like I said earlier, I've spoken to too many people. And when I say too many people, I mean a handful, because not a lot of people are comfortable about talking about killing themselves,
Yeah.
and how they've worked through it or how they're still working through it. But yeah, it does seem that that future planning or the present knowledge of the effect on other people um, does help. But I know that there are a lot of people who struggle with that feeling like it's manipulation to get them to stick around, because that was a very Mormon tactic for a lot of people. It's like, you're just gonna not just ruin your own salvation, but that's so selfish. You're just ruining so many other people's lives. And they're not wrong. They're just terrible about how they go about talking about it. And that's why no one wants to talk about it.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, for a lot of people, that is a factor.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree with that. I don't really like the I don't like the guilt trip. Stick around because you're going to make people sad if you go. I
Yeah,
don't like
yeah,
that angle, but I like the heroic angle where it's like if you stick around, you can reduce other people's suffering. Like there's a
yeah,
bunch of different types of suffering in this world and like you have a unique contribution you can make to reducing the suffering around you. And so it's like if I'm going to incur this much suffering in order to reduce this much suffering, and because I love other people, I'm willing to incur this cost to get a net benefit for the world. You know what I mean?
yeah. And so there's all of that and all of this in play too. But you made me think of something else too that just it goes with how you contextualize and use beliefs you had before too, and what you can do with them. I've recently started talking about my patriarchal blessing again. It's like I don't believe in the church in the way modern Mormons do, and I'm not going back. I made another post. I was like, there's like 2.5 things keeping me away from attending. 2.5. Okay. But they're yeah, they're kind of big 2.5 things. But uh, where was I going? My brain at this hour.
You're fine. You're fine.
Um,
So the we were talking about transcending the suffering and how there's kind of this heroic journey where it's like I embrace the fact that I am going to suffer because I think I can reduce suffering, I can help the
yeah.
world for my loved ones.
So yeah, my patriarchal blessing.
Yeah.
There's been some lines that they always have stuck with me, and one of them is to this feeling of it is, and it's kind of a karma principle. It says that all the good that I do will be returned to me. Um, but it's a little more specific in like the language around it. That's like how I help those closest to me, and even those in my immediate community, kind of
Yeah.
thing. And I do believe
Yeah.
that. And I believe I have done a lot of good things for certain people that it could be 10 years from now, but they'll come back around and they'll be to my benefit. And I didn't have that in mind at the time, but I just see that that's a part I have to play. And if I wasn't here to play it, then other people, my suffering would have just been canceled out and put on someone else, I guess. Is kind of how I feel about it.
Yeah. Are you familiar with like the concept of compersion or confelicity?
I don't recognize the first one.
Compersion is the opposite of envy. And confelicity is the opposite of Schadenfreude or epicuricacy. So I think these two concepts are pretty relevant here. So like there's the simple utilitarian approach is kind of karma. Like I do good to you, you do good to me. It's in my self-interest to be a good person, and I'm going to repeat the cycle.
Yeah, Jacob Hansen. Yep.
But I think a transcendent ethic perhaps is confelicity or compersion, which is I'm not doing good because I want a reward. I'm doing good because I love the fact that you are getting a benefit. Like the fact that you're getting a benefit brings me happiness. Like my neurotransmitters are bubbling with pleasure because you're doing better. I don't need a reward because the fact that you're doing better is reward in and of itself to me.
Yeah, but that's a reward. A lot of people would have a problem with that.
Well, I don't know. Is there a way to get around that?
Yes.
Really?
It's I don't think it's very easy, and it kind of goes to my joke earlier of like I'll just keep this in the Western part of our conversation right now, because there are, I think, some valuable Eastern concepts, and there are people like Wittgenstein and Derrida who've gotten it that help you transcend those things.
Oh, really?
So, well, how do we go about it? What did you have anything else for that you were wanting to cap onto your Schadenfreude confelicity thing before I go on?
So basically, I was offering this as kind of a potential pathway to transcending the suffering, right? It's like maybe your utilitarian calculation isn't working, like the karma math isn't working, but if you can develop confelicity, that can give you more pleasure. And so it's like, okay, originally my pain is here and my pleasure is here, but I'm becoming a confelicious person and I'm deriving more pleasure from other people because I love them. And the more people you love, the more pleasure you get. And suddenly life is worth it because you're getting all of this free pleasure because of love.
Yeah, so that's an inescapable mutual entailing of relationships that you just have to accept as a part of life, just as much as you'd have to accept, as you do have to accept when you're alone in life, screaming in the void in the middle of the night in pain. There's really no difference in the two. And when we talk about them, there's a lot of value judgments and expectations placed on top of them that then lead to either pleasure or suffering. Because I've had plenty of time in my life where, we could just forego parents, grandparents, siblings, those that you grew up with that you'd affect leaving. That's another mutual entailing of relationships that you can't escape. But for the sake of this conversation, we'll say that, yeah, I've had points in my life where I'm not actively participating in that side of the family. We're not all talking, but I am very alone. Not many other relationships. I don't hold many very close friends. The ones I've had have kind of drifted over the years. We say we're close friends at heart, but they're just like that family I grew up with, and we don't see each other anymore. So I can count them as like, it doesn't matter for this conversation. So, but what? So what do you do? How do you transcend it when we're talking about all these things, when you don't have the loved ones and the family, and the guilt trips to keep you around? We'll just say it like that to keep it simple.
Yeah.
And the way you would do it is it's difficult. It's a whole different journey. It was definitely part of my journey, and it's led us here. It can be done by itself, and I think plenty of people do it. Sorry, a lot of different rambling. My brain goes a lot of places, but the point would be to, if you don't have all those things to back you up and to keep you going, like a child or a spouse or whatever. There was something specific you were saying.
So you mentioned a really good question, which is, what if your scope of love isn't enough? You don't have enough loved ones. You don't have a spouse. You don't have kids. What if you're struggling to have enough scope to get that love?
Well, then we're really Camus, and it's just, do you want to walk around or do you want to not? And that seems very basic, but I mean, people are complicated. Depends on if you think something happens after or not, what you do. So what do we believe right now? Do we believe something happens after or not? Because we can have both conversations, but which one do we want to do now?
And you think that is, I'm a little lost as to the relevance. Can you connect the dots?
Yeah. Sorry, my brain has a lot of paths open. So we'll just say we have no loved ones. We are Camus, and we believe that nothing happens when we die. How do you get past that?
Now you're saying that if you believe in an afterlife, that changes the equation, because what, hell? You're going to go to hell if you commit suicide? Is that what you're alluding to?
We'll get there. That's one facet of people's problem with it. Yeah. So, if we're in the place where there's no meaning, nothing matters, we don't know why or what it matters, what's going on here, we fully believe it's just going to be lights out when we die. No one around here that's relying on us. Is it lights out or go around? Plenty of people, I think myself included, for a very long time, I could go around with very little human interaction, very love keeping me around, even with the pain. I think that's just because of the kind of human I am.
So if you're, I want to get to Jesus when you're done with this thought.
Yeah. Yes. I know we're okay. Well, so there's a few thoughts here. Sorry, this is a long train of Camus suicidal stuff. No afterlife, no loved ones. We either wander with no purpose, no foundation, and see, even that's hard. Sorry, my brain goes so many places, because I think someone can only do that for so long before they come across something that makes them want to keep living. You can only do that for so long. But for the sake of the conversation, we'll just say that'll never happen. You're going to be just walking around for the rest of your life. Might as well just kill yourself, so that's that option. Like, if there's no afterlife, if you're not going to come across any more love, it kind of, for humans, it just kind of does feel like, what's the point? So end it. So yeah, Camus right there. But yeah, factors change if we'll just say still we have no loved ones, and just say that we believe that there's an afterlife. So like you said, some people are going to struggle with whether or not they're atheistic now. God, and there's so many people that are atheistic that struggle with this still.
Yeah. So
not just with, sorry.
Oh, you're fine. Did you have?
Not just, yeah. Oh yeah, I have.
Yeah, keep going.
a little
Keep
bit
going.
more here. Not just with suicide, but just with behavior in general. I don't believe in God, but I got to do the right thing, because if kind of Pascal's wager, living it day to day, because if I gotta be doing the right thing. I could go to
Right.
hell. What if I'm wrong? There's people still struggle with that,
Oh,
and that comes in with if you're gonna kill yourself. Um,
yeah.
and sorry, this whole thing I'm working around to how do you transcend it? What we were talking
Yeah.
about. Um,
So, yeah, are you ready to switch gears a little bit?
yeah.
So,
Sorry, I could go on that for a
oh
while.
yeah, that's fine. So, what my thoughts? So, I'm going to offer up a potential strategy. So, I'm going to build up a strategy and tell me what you think. Right. So, Peter Singer, he wrote the book The Expanding Circle, and he builds a philosophy which is kind of a historical pattern that represents a flow of the expansion of the scope of love, right? And so anciently, perhaps we evolved, like you could imagine, like animals in the animal kingdom, often animals are very individualistic. Their scope of love is very
Mhm.
selfish. It's just about me. And then at a certain point in evolutionary history, it's like the scope of love is a mother and the infant. And that love is important because if the infant dies, then the evolution fails. And so the love is what keeps the strategy going, right? And so
Yeah,
the expansion of love helps the strategy. And then maybe in humans, you get a bigger scope of love, which is parents, like the mother, the father, and the child, or it becomes a family scope of love. And then humanity gets more and more advanced. We get tribal love, and we get like religious love, where it's like, here's my you get the clan, you get the tribe, you get the
yeah,
religion, you get the state. It's like, oh, patriotism, it's I love my state, I'm willing to die for my state, right? It's this
yeah,
amorphous idea that somehow your sense of love has attached to this big superstructure, where it's like, I'm willing to die for all of these random citizens that are my fellow citizenry. It's like
yeah,
I'm willing to suffer and die in a war because I love all of these strangers. And
yeah.
so it's like this expanding scope of love, it turns into a powerful source of meaning that offsets the suffering. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. Are you familiar with Michael Levin?
Yes. Yes.
This it sounds a lot. It reminds me a lot of, and I talk about these in my newest thing, his cognitive light cones.
Exactly.
The spatiotemporal awareness of your situation,
Yeah.
basically. A mother and an infant, and
Right.
that's
Right.
a lot of that baked in for sure. I see that imagery there.
Right. So, do you feel like expanding your light cone can help overcome suffering?
Yeah, in many ways, and a lot of the ways we were talking, and the kind of where I was leading to with Camus is, when you add the afterlife as a factor back in there, that's one thing that can expand the light cone in many ways, and I think, um, the light cones in particular, I came to like those a lot, and I'm excited to see what he does with his next paper. Is because they're it's like you said earlier, about the different forms of
Mhm.
utilitarianism with your light cone. The bigger it gets, not just with like love and relationships, but those are all within the cone, and they have to be for it to expand. But what that provides is, and I think he talks about this a bit, is um, how far into the future you can predict um, certain events to happen, like a tick, a dog, and a
Mhm.
human can all predict into the future very vastly differently, and with different contexts, concepts, and scenarios. And the more you expand, but even still, you could expand your cognitive light cone and have all those people in it, and you could have all that cognitive
Ah,
information and keep the logical light cone, and then everyone's obliterated in an accident. It's just you with this huge logical outlook on life, and then your relational light cone is diminished, and then we're back to suffering alone without other people in this massive light cone of consciousness and not knowing what to do. There's a lot of different scenarios there. A lot of different.
So that's a fascinating angle. I haven't thought about that.
Yeah.
So if every other human disappeared, does that change the calculus? That's kind of what you're saying, right?
Yeah, well, and that there's light cones baked into the light cones too, per individual and per community, per system, however you look at it.
Now, at least for our situation, so for our circumstance, there's a lot of people in the world, right? So like we could grow our scope of love to include all of humanity, all of sentience itself, all living creatures. So like we're not limited, because that's a hypothetical that doesn't apply, right?
Correct. Yeah, no, we can definitely, I guess you'd say, access that, expand into that.
Right.
Yeah.
And
100%.
And that flows right into the Jesus concept, where Jesus is the hero who was willing to suffer and die, not just for his tribe, not just for his family, but for all of humanity, right?
Yeah.
And all of humanity, both past and forward. It was the most expanded light cone. That's Jesus.
Yeah, that's exactly where my brain went. As soon as you brought him back up, I was like, yeah, he's just the ultimate light cone, really, in that sense of suffering and understanding and even transcending it. And yeah, there are even other cultures who believe the crucifixion and resurrection story a little bit differently, and they'd still say he transcended that bit of suffering in many ways.
Jordan Peterson, during my worst phases of suffering, I became obsessed with Jordan Peterson, specifically because a lot of Jordan Peterson's content talks about suffering. So I was like eating up all of his suffering content. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And he said something that really like stuck with me. He said, the moment you voluntarily accept your suffering, you simultaneously transcend it. Yeah. And he was saying that's what Jesus did. Jesus voluntarily accepted the suffering. He said, I am going to walk into this suffering voluntarily.
Yeah, and I was going to say that a lot earlier, of when I was talking about the language thing, because you don't need the language in the end. And I kind of spoke to it of just experiencing it. That's really all you have to do, which is accepting it. And what was the Jordan Peterson quote again specifically?
Yeah, the moment you voluntarily accept your suffering, you simultaneously transcend the suffering.
Yeah, I feel like I had another thought in there with the voluntary, but voluntarily, but it escaped me. But he's 100% correct there. In the acceptance of it, I can't. The words escaped me, but that's on the nose, no doubt for me.
Yeah, I've been watching a lot of Chinese xinxia dramas, like TV shows, and it's like there's this kind of they have this interesting metaphysical setting where it's like it's a polytheistic framework where there's like a kingdom of heaven where there's all of these gods, but none of them are perfect, right? There's like corrupt gods, corrupt deities and good deities, and there's like an emperor of heaven. And so they have this really interesting framework, and then they have like a demonic kingdom, but there are like, it's nuanced. There's like good demons and bad demons, and it's kind of a yin yang where there's some bad within the good and there's some good within the bad.
Yeah.
And these two kingdoms are battling over influence of the mortal realm, and there's this reincarnation where people are flowing through these kingdoms. And there's an interesting theme through a lot of these shows where a lot of them are involving the concept of voluntarily suffering, right? there's often this concept of like this. They've got this. They've got the experience of hell, and like the king of the demons, he voluntarily goes into hell. He voluntarily suffers to save the person he loves, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And it's basically, it's mythology that's teaching the Jesus message: voluntarily suffer to help others.
Yeah. Oh, that's baked in to a lot of things. And you said that's in a specific like bit of film that you're watching.
Yeah, different films are expressing this in different ways, but there's kind of a pattern of this message in a lot of them.
Here we go. I was looking for a quote because and the way we were talking about the light cones and Christ earlier kind of made me think of this, and what you were just saying right there. The conclusion in the end is slightly different, but this is you've been making me think about what's called the difference between a stone Buddha and a living Buddha, and this is part of how I was gonna talk about just accepting it, the Jordan Peterson thing. But this is the Zen way about it. So this quote is from a book of Alan Watts. Might be a lecture. I don't remember. This is an old citation. Anyway, in Zen, there is a difference made between a living Buddha and a stone Buddha. If you go up to a stone Buddha and you hit him hard on the head, nothing happens. You break your fist or your stick. But if you hit a living Buddha, he may say ouch, and he may feel pain, because if he didn't feel something, he wouldn't be a human being. Buddhas are human. They are not devas. They are not gods. They are enlightened men and women. But the point is that they are not afraid to be human. They are not afraid to let themselves participate in the pains, difficulties, and struggles that naturally go with human existence.
Wow.
And so I guess before I had Alan Watts to put all the words and Zen stories out there for me, I experienced a lot of this in meditation. And going back, so I had taken LSD to get over all the existential identity, suicidal stuff. And that first time, there was just, first of all, the cosmos sang me, come ye saints. So, we'll talk about that later.
Wait, you had a psychedelic trip of a church hymn? Is that what I'm understanding?
Yes.
Wow. Were the elves good singers, or were they off tune?
No, they were perfect. Yeah, it was great. No, it was really unique experience. I've written it in my book, 5th chapter. It was published this morning, so people can go, do that. But what was I getting at? Oh yeah, so I did the thing, the LSD, to get over everything. But what I saw in that experience was the ability to kind of always have that experience. That was because I was raised like Eastern things, meditation, yin yang, woo stuff, like they're all confused about their opposition and all things, kind of. So, but after that experience with the LSD, I was like, oh no, yeah, I can just sit on my chair and do this, sort of thing. And it was through years of doing that.
Sit on your chair and do what specifically?
Just meditate, like just detach, understand so many things differently. Like, I don't need to kill myself for all the reasons I've been feeling. All the pain I'm going through, it ebbs and flows. It's constant, but it's not always extreme. I'm not always screaming into the void in the night. Some nights I do get sleep, and if I'm not here in chronic pain, then maybe it's going to be my daughter here in chronic pain instead. Like it's what I said earlier. Like if I'm not here going through it, someone else is going to be going through it. And I've gotten to the point where I can get through it. It's not fun. It's not easy, but I don't want it to be anyone else. So I can accept that part of my living Buddha experience. I don't have to get hit on the head with a stick to say ouch. I just have to sit in a very soft chair
Mm,
and mind my own
right.
business to say
Right.
ouch. Um,
Yeah.
and torturing yourself with the expectation that it's going to end, that you're going to find the answer magically, or at all, honestly. Because for me, it's like, how do you cure pain, first of all? But pain that's everywhere, that's muscular, that's osteo, that's neuropathic. Like, it's all the pains, not just a form of
Mm,
pain. So I really had to come to the terms of, yeah, I either kill myself and it ruins everyone else's lives and I give everyone else all the pain that I'm feeling anyway, or I understand that I'm going to find happiness regardless. And the people who tell me I'm not a burden really mean it, even though it makes things more difficult. Me not being here would be 100 times more difficult. And another thing, if I can't get through it, I've brought someone else into this world. They, I don't know. I have to get through it for them. Okay, some of it does come back around that for me. Because what if she ends up in chronic pain
mm.
too? No one else in the family understands it. Like,
Okay.
I
You got to
don't. I have to be there here for even those variables. There's a lot.
exactly, and that's the heroic journey. Is you got to do it for her, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I really like that quote. The whole not being afraid of the suffering. That was one of the obstacles I had to go through during when I was at my worst. I was terrified of my pain. I was like, this thing is it was a monster that I was just terrified of. Like this thing was literally going to kill me. It was so powerful and overwhelming, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I had to I went through like yeah, Jordan Peterson also gave me this idea. Jordan Peterson said that art is a reflection of value. It's a reflection of a hierarchy of values. It's a reflection of meaning. And you need meaning to offset your suffering. And so he said you should do a meditation with art. Find art that is
Yeah.
meaningful and meditate on why it's meaningful to you. And maybe that will give you clues as to what can offset your suffering, right?
Yeah. Yeah. There's not nothing there, especially if you don't do drugs. Yeah. Definitely stare at some stained glass or a beautiful piece of artwork for 20 to 40 minutes. And I mean, honestly, you don't even need that. If you can be comfortable enough, just look at yourself in a mirror. That's artwork enough. There's art in all that reflection. You want a reflection, you just use a fucking mirror, Jordan. Look at yourself for 20 to 40 minutes and you'll find meaning there too. You don't need art. Art, while wonderful, is still just stained glass on top of the image of God. That's what that's what Islam's right about. You don't paint God because you can't, and if you do, you're fucking it up. They just get all dogmatic about it, but there's something there.
Yeah, that's a good point. What's the whole Taoist thing? Like the eternal Tao is not that which can be described with words.
Yeah, the cannot be named, I think, is specifically what it says.
Right. So
Yeah.
kind of same idea.
The Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So do we want to switch gears to talking a little bit about your thoughts on consciousness?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, you've written a couple books and you've focused a lot on consciousness. You've had a lot of interesting experiences. So yeah, do you want to introduce kind of where you're coming from on that?
Yeah. I mean, where am I coming from on that? So So I guess I'll say I just coined my own term, and I was trying to find it so I could properly define it because I'm still integrating it into my own brain. But you hear people talk a lot about panpsychism and things like that, and I agree with that. Joseph Smith was a panpsychist. And then there's things like panentheism, and where I'm going at the phrase I termed, whatever, you know what I'm saying.
Oh,
The phrase I made, the word I made, panpsychenentheism.
whoa.
Yeah.
Pan-psych. What
And then
what's the and?
look at that.
There's a theism.
N. So it's a mixture of panentheism, not pantheism. So there's panentheism, pantheism, and panpsychism. It's all of them in one.
I need to,
panpsychenentheism.
oh geez, I need to write this down. What the hell?
I'll look it up here in my thing. My search over there isn't working.
Is it? How come the comment? Oh wait, what comments? How comments aren't working, or private chat? Do you want to type it in the private chat so I can see what?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Panpsychenentheism. Panpsychenentheism. Okay, so break it down. What are we talking about here?
Okay. Sorry, I was trying to see if I had gotten my definition in here, and I kind of did, but then I was cheeky about it in my book because I am, and there's a Hoffmanism right by it, so I don't know what I was saying anymore. It's 2 a.m. almost. So panpsychism is basically the belief that fundamentally everything has a piece of consciousness in it. There's a lot of different, I think panpsychism has just become one of those words like spirituality or the world. They have too many meanings. But that's like the base layer of panpsychism. Everything has a bit of consciousness. But then you're like, okay, but what's consciousness? Okay, sure, yeah, I believe that everything's conscious, I get it. Okay, but what does that mean? So people are it depends on whether you go secular science or religious about it. A lot of people in the mystical, so there's the pantheism, which is all the different gods, but then there's the panentheism, which kind of marries panpsychism, which doesn't say that there's a bit of consciousness in all things, but it says that God is that bit of consciousness in and through all things.
So panentheism, we are all fragments of God. Is that how to think of it?
Yeah. So God still transcends us, but interpenetrates everything. Panpsychism leaves it to bifurcate and divide it up into just a bunch of little things, but panentheism still says, nah, there's still one supreme, and that one supreme somehow is also in everything. And so for me, it's just kind of all of that. So panpsych and entheism, there's little bits of consciousness in everything, and sure enough, there's some sort of big quotes for people just listening. God, that is that same little bit of consciousness that's in everything. So that's panpsych and entheism. It admits to some other one giant big thing. I don't want to say like source or God or whatever, because we'll get to that level of it. But it doesn't leave it to, I think panpsychism just leaves you a little nihilistic, because you're like, okay, yeah, everything's conscious, but what does that mean? You need a little something else to get the wheels turning into. It depends on if you want to kill yourself or not, we'll say.
Hey, can we take a break real quick?
Oh, for sure.
All right. We were just talking about panpsych and panentheism, which is the combination of the two theories, panpsychism and psychentheism. Is that correct?
Pan- panentheism and panpsychism. And I found my little updated quote about it. And there's a little bit of like quantum mechanical language in it, because some of what I write is pointed to like certain scientific concepts, whether or not I stay mystical. I think it's relevant. So I guess what I'm getting at with the panpsychism here, and there's probably some stuff that came before it, but essentially is there's an underlying field of intelligence with its focus on the proliferation of a broader set of interconnected intelligences in myriad formless forms, making its eigenstate an eigenmode and becoming more generally accepted in the reality of things. It's something with the semblance of panpsychism and panentheism in nuclear fusion, something I call panpsychenentheism. So I guess that's how I define
Wow,
it.
that was a lot. You're going to have to break that down a little bit.
So there's a lot of language. This is the final chapter of the book, so there's like 5 concepts baked into that one little paragraph. So there's an underlying field of intelligence. So
field of intelligence. How are you using the term field?
Field is the scope of the world we live in which we operate. The field, we could just think we're on a soccer field and that's all that we're doing, kind of thing. So the field of our experience.
Did you call this a light cone, or is it different?
That's baked into here. Okay. So so in Taoism, and the specific Taoism that I have come to like, or it's the transliteration, whatever. They talk about how Taoism has a field and a focus, and that is how you can come in tune with the Tao, be Tao, all that kind of stuff. So there's an underlying field, just the field of experience of the world, and we're in it. It's a prepotent system that was here before us. Okay, underlying field, prepotent system, and it's intelligent. There were intelligent things going on before we got here.
Can you explain what you mean by prepotent system?
Yeah, so prepotent means that they're pre came before you, potent, churning up's got electrical energy, kinetic, whatever. It's doing something. It's prepotent, and it was so potent that it was systemized, and that all existed before you got here. So there was an underlying field that was a prepotent system, but it was still related to you before you came here to put in, which is the next part, the focus of proliferation into the broader set, which is the field and all its subfields. So this is consciousness already existing as an underlying field of intelligence. And it itself has a focus to proliferate. And when we come into it, we bring a subfield on top of the field of consciousness, and we have our own focuses that we need to proliferate into broader sets or broader fields or different subfields. And like I'm saying with the prepotent system of relationships, all that proliferation and focus in everyone's fields, they're all interconnected. So that's all the first sentence, and that's just the Taoism of it. Okay. The underlying field of intelligence with its focus on proliferation of a broader set of interconnected intelligences. Obviously, we're saying intelligences here. We're both ex-Mormon. I mean to use that word very specifically here for probably psychedelic and mystical reasons we'll get into here in a minute. But
sorry.
The light cone. So the light cones. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to ask if this is, are you tying this to the Mormon conception of intelligences or different?
Mormon conception, yeah. I mean that very specifically. So, but if we bring in the Mike 11 light cones, a light cone is just an underlying field of intelligence, and then you as you, the one who's suffering, the one who's not suffering, comes into that underlying field again, and It's, you know, underlying fields with focus all the way down, we could say.
So, okay.
And this was, yeah, sorry, this was all to cap it back. This is all just a definition of panpsychenentheism and the interconnectedness of consciousness.
So let me translate what you've said so far and tell me if I'm correctly representing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So panpsychenentheism, the idea that basically the root ontology is energy. Everything comes back to energy, and energy is consciousness, and this entirety is God, and this entirety of conscious energy is spreading out over time. It's forming different. I forget the word you used, but it's branching out into different subconsciousnesses, subfields of that unific original field, and so it's going from a unity to a multiplicity. And so there's like this unific intelligence field that is kind of creating a multiplicity of smaller fields.
Yeah, that's not far off, I'd say. There was, I forgot what I had one objection and I forgot it.
Okay.
It was something you said just a second ago, and it wasn't a big thing, but that's not far off for where we've started. Yeah.
Now, how does the Mormon conception of intelligence fit in? Can you kind of, for people who aren't Mormon, can you kind of flesh that out?
Yeah, I can try. That's a very, so intelligence in the Doctrine and Covenants section 93. I'm bad at references. Verses 29 to 33, I think specifically, if you want to go look it up, are the most. Also D&C 8840, D&C 131.7. I think these are all the intelligence references. Some of those could have been wrong. I've been citing a lot of things.
Your Mormon is showing.
Oh, sorry. I'll cover up. Sorry, what was the question?
What is the explain Mormon concept of intelligence?
It is so Joseph Smith. Sorry, I've been reading Orson Pratt. They're similar but different. Man was in the beginning as a little bit of intelligence. We didn't have our bodies. We didn't even have our spirit bodies yet. Before God came around, there we were as the soupy soup of the myriad forms of little bits of the unific consciousness out in a dark pool, kind of doing our thing. We were, like I said here, making eigenstates, eigenmodes, which I don't know if you know about eigenvalues and that kind of stuff.
Just probably barely enough to follow, but you should definitely flesh it out for the audience.
I mean, I don't know if I can really. Can anyone flesh out eigenvalues? That's what I think people are trying to now. That's why specifically.
Tell me if I'm wrong. That's related to the collapsing of the wave function, right?
Yeah, it's basically noticing the oscillations in the wave function and when it collapses, when it changes. Because there's eigenvalues, eigenmodes, eigenstates, eigensets, lots of eigens. But so what I'm getting at when I put that in here and bring it up is because there is something in there, about the energy of that intelligence that. So the overall. Oh, I remember what I objected with, because you mentioned time and the overall unific God, whatever we want to call it, doesn't need time. There is still that timeless nature, and part of the myriad forms, part of the fields and subfields is linear time, but there is space outside that we can talk about, and that is part of the eigenstates, eigenmodes, wave functions, energy, chi, whatever, kinetic energy. We were little bits of consciousness in a soupy soup doing nothing, essentially neutral charge. You and I talked in a messenger once about my different theory of Adam and Eve. Adam fell that men might be. He got a negative charge. Eve ate of the fruit to gain a positive charge. And that's what was going out when we were intelligences. We were just this little bit of, like, we knew something was going on. We could come together and put our cognitive light cones in a different pattern and become human and build to what we were today. But that's what we were. That's intelligence out there in the universe. A bit of nothing that kind of knows what's going on but can't do anything about it until it recognizes its underlying field of intelligence and puts its focus on proliferation into linear time and the experiences we're having now. That's all Mormon intelligence.
Okay, excellent. So I'm my memory, if my memory serves me, the concept of Mormon intelligence, Joseph Smith says that spirits are matter, but a more fine substance of matter, right?
Yeah.
So are you on the same page thinking that this is all just like quantum material, basically?
Yeah, like, and I'm like, I in far too much agreement with Joseph Smith on that. Like, sorry guys, he's right. He just as much as Jordan Peterson was right about accepting it and letting it go. Joseph Smith was right about some other fine, pure form of matter that we can feel. We just don't know how to talk about it, and it's there.
Yeah. You don't have to accept that someone is. I get what am I trying. You don't. You can accept what people say without idolizing them, right?
Oh, for
I
sure.
don't
Yeah.
idolize Jordan Peterson. I don't agree with him on a ton of stuff, but I thought some of his stuff was pretty useful, right? And so,
100%. Yeah.
you don't idolize Joseph Smith, but some of it is useful, right?
Yeah. Basically, sometimes I take drugs and I'm just like, that's what he meant in DNC, whatever. Gosh. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I think, tell me if I'm wrong, I think in Mormon doctrine, the intelligence, the substance of intelligence is eternal. It's co-eternal with God. Is that correct?
Yeah, cannot be created nor made. Always has been.
Right, which is a very fascinating angle.
Yeah.
All right. So I have an important question about your conception of intelligence. Michael Levine, he connects the concept of intelligence to goals. He defines intelligence, I think the Wittgensteinian way, which is intelligence is being able to accomplish the same goal by different means. So there's like the creativity of finding problem solving different ways to get around an obstacle.
Yeah. So I would say yes. That is baked into the very initial beginning thoughts of like Mormon intelligence, but and in the end, like if you think of it as a light cone or a cell system or whatever, Mormonism is an underlying field with its own light cone, and all the members have a goal of not just eternal family, but eternal church with God, worlds proliferating into a broader set of eternal interconnectedness. Like, so, that's inescapable there. What was your more?
Yeah. Is the concept of intelligence necessarily based on goals? And if so, what are the goals of this unific intelligence? Yeah. How do you map it to goals?
Yeah, well, and there's something else you said about how Michael talked about it, is about how there's just, you worded it a specific way, but all the different ways to accomplish the goal, basically. That's where it sort of breaks down for Mormon intelligence, because they say there's one specific way to go about it to accomplish the goal. There's a limited cognitive light cone at some point in Mormonism, and for some of us, that limit made it so that when we were faced with other things, that field and its focus, that field of Mormonism and that focus of me as Christopher, as a Mormon, just imploded. and I had to expand a whole new light cone as a whole new identity.
Right. You had to figure out how to solve the problem in a different way, right?
Yeah, I couldn't. There was one mode I was in. My eigenstate didn't like it. It needed a new value. It had to oscillate its wave function out of the identity and the pattern that was me from my Mormon foundings. And like I said earlier, probably even from my negative 84 plus year Mormon foundings because of my family, generational traumas and whatever. And all of that had to collapse. But oddly enough, it had to collapse for me to be able to access it more fully, because when I came out of it, I gained all that. I gained that cognitive light cone back, but then was able to, like we're saying, take it down a different pathway or methodology or whatever instead, and expand it further.
So do you think intelligences have fundamental goals? Does this panpsychentheism have a goal?
It's like a yes and no. It's a yes because there's obviously something going on and life forms want to live. But it's a no for that Wittgensteinian, Derridian Zen stuff, because if you're a cell and you're a cell system, you're not a human with linguistic talking about your goals. You are accepting, like, whether or not the cell system or whatever is suffering. They're accepting their situation in their field and whatever that field's focus is, and they make it work. But that's just what we were saying earlier. You just have to accept it, and you just have to experience it. It's like you screaming for 4 hours in the night because of your back. It's just like taking mushrooms and having a terrible experience for 4 hours in the middle of the night. And it's just like trying to figure out your cognitive light cones.
Okay, so it's less about goals then?
Yeah, because
I guess,
because what is a goal? Tell me what's a goal.
Well, a goal, the easiest way to think about it is like you're starting at point A and you want to move to point B, and then you go do it. So it's like having a directionality and a destination.
Yeah. And so I guess some of the ways I try to, if we're talking about the light cones and cell structures and other things that aren't humans, how do they determine what their goal is? They don't have a podcast to sit here and talk about it. They have to make a split decision because they're a cell system in a field with a different focus. And if we don't just think about it that way, but if we apply that to us, when you sit back and experience it, I mean, you kind of just see that there is no goal, but the goal is living. And you don't.
Okay.
When you're in a functional system like the field of Mormonism, and they're going about, like, they don't need to talk about a lot of what they do. They show up and they do it, and it happens, and they make their community work, and that happens that's the same thing. It gets to the point where the goal is something that's not spoken about. And for humans, that's a lot more complicated because we conceptualize and put contexts on things and have expectations. But when you think of a broader system, in the end, when it's working properly, you're not talking about what the goal is, you're living it.
All right. I think I want to flesh out my perspective on consciousness, tie it into this goal thinking, and then maybe a little compare and contrast.
For sure.
Okay. So I've been developing a paradigm of consciousness that I call energism. And energism is a Russellian monism theory of consciousness. monism versus a dualism, right?
Yeah.
Commonly, there are dualistic theories of consciousness where you've got materials and you've got mind, and they're two fundamentally different things, and somehow they work together, right? That's a dualism. The monism is that it's just one thing. Now,
Mm-hmm.
the Russellian monism is nuanced. The Russellian monism is there's one fundamental thing, and this one fundamental thing splits into two things. And so my energism is basically saying energy is the fundamental monism, but energy splits into two different things: conscious experience, qualia, and like quantum particles, right?
Yeah.
Now, the angle of goals, are you familiar with the free energy principle or the concept of homeostasis?
Yeah.
So I think that if you boil it down to the fundamentals, you could just attribute really like dumbed down goals, right? It's like you're minimizing entropy or the free energy principle,
Mm-hmm.
minimizing the gap between expectations and reality, like, fitting into your surroundings properly. Um, homeostasis has the goal of balance. And like within an atom, it's like, well, there's the electron and the proton, and they come together, but if you come too close, you're out of balance, and if you're too far away, you're out of balance, and there's this happy medium, or you orbit within the happy medium of homeostatic balance, right?
Yeah.
And so you could kind of have this really reductive, like there's really dumb goals at base reality, like really simple goals, and then like you build up, like as you add these things together, you get more and more complex goals, right? And so that's kind of a bottom up emergentist perspective of goals, where there's really small goals that become bigger goals after you add evolution and complexity, and
Mm-hmm.
emergence.
Yeah.
And so under my paradigm, uh, I wouldn't think that there's this unific consciousness that has a goal. I would just think there's this chaotic soup that becomes more and more specific as it evolves.
Yeah. Um, and is that the Russellian monism of it?
The Russellian monism is ontologically there's a unific origin, which is energy. Like we all come from energy, but I'm
Yeah.
not attributing anything special to this origin. It just transforms into everything else.
Yeah, and I guess I mean I'd still say I don't attribute anything really special to it. Um, but there was a few things in there that it's the energy, and how it I guess starts oscillating and then trickles out to larger goals. That's just how Joseph Smith spoke about intelligence too, and in like non-canonized discourses, or how like the Pratt brothers spoke about it. There's a lot of that in there.
Yeah, Joseph Smith definitely talked about hierarchies of intelligence, where like
Hmm.
Abraham was higher intelligence than other spirits.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. There was that in the Pearl of Great Price too.
Right.
Yeah,
And God said, I am the highest intelligence of them all. He's like putting
yeah,
himself up on the pedestal, right?
yeah.
So
And that's where you and I don't jive with that. Well,
okay, so your panpsychentheism does not attribute maximal intelligence to the unific God, or
I mean it. It's like it doesn't. It doesn't like what's maximal intelligence. For, because people like we come from a world that means the maximal intelligence means like this God knows everything. Um, we can talk about all the omnis it knows about, and the one people don't even talk about is the omnitemporality of it, because they don't understand time and they don't know what to do with it. And that comes into, if you understand that unific God's place in time, uh, then I mean you can escape a lot of making it anything special or important. It's hard to say. So it's no, I don't, because that means if it thinks, if it thinks it's far more intelligent, then it's just not. It doesn't. It just experiences the grand intelligence. It doesn't have to tell us about it, because ye are gods. You're just that grand intelligence too, and it doesn't need to tell you. You can experience it. I don't know, it's kind of hard to say, but so it's like, no, I don't think it's like what we were raised to believe that grand intelligence is, but it's intelligent in the fact that it is in all of us, and we're here talking about it, and it has all that information all the time.
It's just appropriating our intelligence.
Yeah.
How rude.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and because there's another thing that Joseph Smith was probably right about. Like, everything you learned when you were here, it goes with you afterwards, and it gets uploaded into like whatever. And so, yeah, it doesn't, that's, I think I wrote about this a bit in my book, like the universe, the universe and that God's that's its cognitive light cone in the linear space of time we're talking about. It doesn't need a light cone in its timeless temporal form, because it's beyond that intelligence. It doesn't need to be the supreme intelligence, because it knows intelligence is fruitless. I hope any of this is making sense.
Barely. But we're getting a little bit low on time, and I want to make sure we have enough time to talk about your experience with psychedelics. Do you think it's a good time to shift gears?
Probably.
Okay. So I was reading some of your book on the quantum moire. Am I saying that correctly?
I've heard I say moire. I've heard a lot of different things though.
Yeah. So. You got me on that word. There was a certain passage in there that really stood out to me as really profound, really visceral. And so maybe we could start with an expansion on this. I forget who you were referencing, but you were saying someone was talking about, they were describing the phenomenon wherein you're having a psychedelic experience and you go into this realm where there's almost this this ask and you shall receive magic going on, where I think his example is like, I want to see like Greek
art deco
art, and like all of this like Greek art just is like getting downloaded into his sphere of consciousness, just like he's getting flooded by whatever he asks for.
So what's your specific question about it? There's a lot here.
What the hell is that? Have you experienced that? How do I experience that? And any of those routes.
Well, how is pretty easy. If you've taken high school chemistry and you know basic PPE, you can make DMT and you can experience this. Okay. It's that easy. No, I'm just kidding. But what's going on there was Terence McKenna. And it's specifically a DMT thing. I can do it on mushrooms too. A little bit harder on LSD. And there's reasons for that, funny enough, because of maybe how you connect with certain bits of the soupy soup of consciousness and the intelligences out there and whatever's going on. Some people will say it's all in your head. They just haven't read enough. But so what's going on there? What Terence McKenna is saying is the experience is you can smoke DMT. And I guess, should I explain the experience a little?
Definitely.
Maybe those who don't know. DMT is a crystal, kind of a white powdery something. This looks like sugar, different color. And it's made from tree bark, a Mimosa hostilis acacia tree, or a different form of it is the one that like Homer Simpson licking toads and tripping. You can get it from frogs too. It's just a little different experience, but in the end, still DMT. But the type that I'm talking about is the tree form. You vaporize it and you inhale it. And first of all, it's about a 15-minute experience, like on average. So you take magic mushrooms or LSD, you're gone for like 6 to 15 hours. You don't know sometimes. With DMT, you go further than either of those other two, and you're back a lot faster.
Wow.
So you take it, you hold your breath, a couple hits, and if you take it the traditional way, you basically just feel like a hand comes by and rips you out of your chest and you're gone. And it's very, like you hear near death experience, tunnel white lights or stars at the end and all these sounds, and then you come out and there's this other world kind of thing. But one of the things, there's a lot that can happen in this world, a lot you can do. But one of the things you can do is you can ask this place that you enter into, or the beings you might come across, to give you a certain experience, or to answer a question you might have. And so what Terrence was doing, he was going in there, and because DMT is just, it's so inexplicable to so many people, and it's so difficult to describe what you see and where you go. We're getting better at it, but back in Terrence's day, they were doing a lot of experimenting, but there was something in there. You could enter this DMT world, and whatever you're presented with, it comes to a point where you can tailor the experience, and you can say to the space, whatever it is, I want to see Greek architecture. I want to see Art Deco. I want to see Picasso. And this isn't every time. There's levels of experience. You're not always going to be able to. This is just something that can happen. But sure enough. So I've done it. DMT, there's a lot of people encounter jesters or like clowns and stuff. I was afraid of that, like afraid to have a bad trip because I had a fear of clowns growing up. I was like well past it, but I was like, of course I'm going to take the psychedelic and like Pennywise is going to come around the corner and want to kill me. So I was like kind of afraid that I'd have like a bad like clown trip or something. So I have my first trip, and we'll talk about that another time. But it made me have some questions, and it wasn't like I want to see Art Deco and all this stuff, but it was more like, what the hell is going on? But before I was brave enough to kind of ask that question, I had heard this quote from Terrence that you can tailor it, and so I was like, okay, I'll test it out before I like ask a real question. So I smoked again, and I went in there, and I got to a comfortable spot, and I said, okay, show me the clowns. I want to see the gestures. Like, I want to, if something's going to happen, just now's the time. And the whole trip just switched in like these towering green spooky like haunted buildings like popped up, and then all these like clowns came out, and they had like these long legs.
Wow.
And but they were just like, hey man, we're not here to scare you, we're just here to have a good time. But off of that, there was so much, because I wondered, I was like, what is going on there? Like, how can that be possible? And there was so much from my first experience too, that led me to what my other question was because in that first experience, so there was something in there. I was like, these are those intelligences that Joseph Smith was talking about. These little things I was seeing, these little bits of energy. And so I wanted to know. So I started listening to Terrence McKenna. I heard him say you can like ask these things and change the scenery. And what's going on there is a lot involved with our own personal DNA, the DNA of the plant. There's timey-wimey things and consciousness involved there, but that's maybe for another conversation. But so I went in and I asked for the clowns, and I was like, okay, it actually worked. Now I can ask them the real question. And there's something else that Terrence McKenna talks about, is that you'd come across what he called the self-transforming elf machines. And what I had seen is these little bits of energy, whatever, everywhere, like making up everything, that panpsychic thing. And you could ask them to turn into something else. And so he called them the self-transforming elf machines, because sometimes, yeah, they are presented as like a little creature or something. Kind of strange.
But yours were giants.
After I asked them, when I first saw them, they were just individual particles everywhere, in the airspace, and every piece of furniture I looked at, and myself. But in the airspace, I knew I could ask those bits be Art Deco, be gestures, but I wondered how they could do that. Are they intelligent? Is this what he was talking about? So after I went cavorting with the gestures, I went back in and I said, okay, is what I'm seeing, are you guys intelligences? And are you the same thing as self-transforming elf machines? Are they talking about the same thing, Joseph Smith and Terence McKenna? And I got a very specific answer. It's in my book. And another guy who did extended state DMT, he called it the teaching presence and intelligence. And he asked a very similar question. He basically asked what it is, I think, like, what are you or something. But I was asking, hey, are you the same thing that these two other guys are talking about? And my answer, I'm going to confuse it with his, but they were very similar, which was basically, we are they and they are you. It's like, yes, they're talking about the same things. They've just put different terms on it. Joseph Smith called them intelligence. Terence called them self-transforming elf machines for whatever reason. And other people call them this. It's just a bunch of different names for the same thing.
So does that mean they are you sounds like it's saying that this is part of who you are, like they're part of your consciousness? Is that
there is, so yeah, I think there's a multi-complex layer. There's that layer, yes, but if we stick to that layer, people think it's all in your head. And if you think it's all in your head, then you're solipsistic and the world's about you. And no one else is out there with the world all in their head. The world's shut up in a tiny little bone box and no one else is alive, just you.
To me that doesn't follow. So maybe you could flesh that out a bit. Like if for example, two different people, they both take DMT, they both have experiences in their head. Just the fact that they have an experience in their head does not preclude or stop someone else from having an experience in their head.
Yes, but to say what you experience on the psychedelic and the entities you encounter and what you talk with or speak with or commune with, whatever, to say that that is all in your head also does a disservice to, the rest of everything around you. But it would also, it's just what I said about like how you're saying it doesn't track. It's just applying it on a macro scale. So it does track the more you think about it, I guess is what I'm saying. But I feel like you had something else to ask. That'll probably clarify.
Sure. So like, okay, when I hear you say this, my immediate thought is the brain produces our consciousness, and the brain, we have like 5% is our conscious brain, and like 95% is our subconscious or unconscious. And maybe there's like micro personalities operating at the subconscious layer. And so maybe when you have a trip, you're digging down into the unconscious, and maybe you're getting to meet parts of your brain that you weren't aware of before. And so it's exploring your own brain, as opposed to exploring other entities.
Yeah, so that's where I say, yeah, it's just complexly layered in. Yes. And I guess one way, especially for the ex-Mormon crowd and Mormon crowd, because I know with our Porch Time friends hanging around, we've got both. And wrapping around in our last few minutes to, the Camus suicide. Is there an afterlife? Is there not? If you go into the DMT space, or I guess we'll just say, so my grandfather, he was meditating in the Salt Lake City temple and he met an entity too. He didn't have to smoke DMT, but he met an entity. She sat there on the bench with him in the chapel before their session and they spoke. And so was that all in my grandpa's head? So the answer, if you know the whole story, and people can go read it, it's in my book, second chapter. Yes, it was all in his head because it was his great grandmother. And his great grandmother is all in his head because he is the DNA of that family line, that underlying field, or this underlying subfield of that family line in the overall field of Mormonism, came out in the temple with a focus to make sure certain temple work was getting done, is what happened. But it that in and of itself can't mean that it happened all in my grandfather's head, because my great great grandmother who visited him existed before he had a head to be in. And to lock her up inside there still is to do not just her existence now, whatever that means, but all the existence she had before, that same disservice that we were talking about. And I know that's hard to follow, but it when you sit with that long enough, you'll find the separation that shows that, of course, it's in your head, but the simple fact that there are things out here that we can touch and that have their own voices and have their own experiences means that it's not. This is where we need 2 more hours, because this is what I figured out in meditation for years, and it's hard to find the words for it because you accept it and you experience it and you know it without words, in a much easier way.
Yeah, I haven't had any of these experiences, so there's a little bit of a gap experientially, so it's hard to 100% understand.
Yeah.
But I feel like when you're in a dream state, lots of things are possible when you're in a dream state. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so, how would you contrast the psychedelic experience to a dream state?
Well, that's maybe a weird question for me because I don't a whole lot, because of my long-standing sleep problems. I pretty much lucid dream the whole time I'm sleeping. So I know I'm asleep. I know what's going on in the house. I could, you can control certain things, like you can take DMT and control certain things. Eventually get to a spot where it's too deep and I don't know, but that's like an hour and a half, and the rest of the time I'm just aware. And that is very much like taking a psychedelic. So I don't know if I could contrast it much, especially because there was something you said about consciousness, subconscious, unconscious. I don't think consciousness exists because that's what we're talking about. But the subconscious, unconscious stuff, I think those are holdups, tricks. And we don't have consciousness. We are in consciousness. That's part of what I'm saying. It's all in you can't say it's all in your head. To say consciousness is all in your head is to claim consciousness on behalf of it and everyone, and to say that they can't experience it as well. None of us have consciousness. We are all conscious in consciousness.
That's a very tricky paradigm to wrap my head around. So I had a follow-up question, which is Anil Seth, the neuroscientist Anil Seth. I think his hypothesis is that consciousness is a controlled hallucination. How do you feel about that description?
I don't agree with like any neuroscientist on how they talk about the field of consciousness. There's one in particular, Andrew Gallimore. Really like him, smart guy, the only guy who really right now is talking, knows what he's talking about, like neurobiology and neurochemistry as far as psychedelic interaction goes. But he's wrong in the same sense that Seth, I'm just saying Seth now, Anil is wrong. They talk about how Well, I guess first of all, I'll say we're all on a psychedelic trip right now. We are just very used to it. They'll call it consensus reality, and that's the mode we're in. But it's just, well, but we're not all having the same trip. If you think about it, some of us are on a lot of serotonin and it feels great. Some people got a lot of dopamine or whatever, and those are their trips. And when you think about conscious experience that way, when you take DMT or LSD, or when you dream, you're just, they say you're switching. This is what I'm getting at. Neuroscientists will say you're switching the state of consciousness. But consciousness is not something that can be switched. It's what uh, our experience expands and contracts into it. And so what did Anil Seth say exactly that made me think of all this?
Yeah, consciousness is a controlled hallucination.
Controlled hallucination. So in a sense, yeah, because our neurology has a hold on that, and that's part of the functional determined system that we're in. But it doesn't really have control of it because everyone's so different and everyone's having a different trip, a different experience, different levels of. Someone took 150 micrograms of serotonin and someone else took 500. That's all it is consciousness expanded and contracted or constricted in different states, different modes, different oscillations in their waves. They don't switch one or the other in some sort of controlled fashion. Yeah, I guess is what I'm getting at.
All right. Well, we're getting about ready to wrap up. Do you want to kind of summarize how this all fits together for you?
Oh man, I'm not sure I know. I just spent the last year writing 130,000 words trying to figure it out, and I hit publish on the button last night, like right before you messaged me, actually. And there was a sense of, I think this is just the beginning. I don't even know how it connects yet.
Well, tell us how people can find you, find your book, etc.
Yeah, so I'll send links and stuff. It's all fresh, but I just put it on Amazon. There'll be a link on my website, which will be easier to find, christopherschenefeld.com. I'll update that soon.
Excellent.
But yeah.
We'll definitely share all those links. And, Christopher, it's been a pleasure talking to you. I know that we could do this for another 6 hours. And
we really could. Yeah, no, it's been a pleasure being here.
All right. Take care.
See ya.